Texas, Oklahoma State. Those have been proven to be tough late games for TCU late, and they just can't get over that hump.
Well, and TCU, that's the problem. That's exactly right, the hump. They can't get past themselves to get – well, they're going to get into a bowl game, and we're just talking about getting into the playoffs, so we'll see what happens. Strength of schedule, Missouri Tigers. They'll try to get off to a better start than last season when the Tigers lost 5 straight FBS games. But in the early schedule, it does kind of look tough for the Missouri Tigers. Their non-conference schedule includes Wyoming, a visit to Purdue, which let's talk a little bit about Purdue if you want to as well. I mean, Purdue, under the new coach and under the new regime, they're starting to turn heads, and we'll see if they're able to really make a Big Ten difference. But I would keep my eye on Purdue, as much as I hate to say that. Followed by also with the Missouri, going back to Missouri Tigers, they've got a rough SEC start with Georgia and at South Carolina and at Alabama. And Memphis is another dangerous out-of-conference games in October. And the Tigers also has to, let's not forget, they also have to face Florida and Tennessee. Man, I think you look at the Missouri Tigers, they've got one of the toughest schedules going out there as you look going into the 2018-2019 season.
And Missouri, to me, just kind of reminds me, makes me think of Rutgers, in the Big Ten for the football program. Missouri and the SEC and Rutgers for football in the Big Ten, neither one of those schools belong in those conferences for football. They might do okay in other sports. I know basketball, Missouri's usually pretty decent. Other sports, they're okay, and that makes sense to be in the SEC. But for football, that football program right now does not belong in the SEC. I mean, there's no way that Georgia's already up by 7 touchdowns in that game, and we're talking that game's 2 months from now. So that's really there's nothing to say much more about Missouri in the SEC. I mean, you can say the exact same thing about Rutgers in the Big Ten. Neither one of those programs, for football anyway, belong in those conferences.
Agreed. We'll talk a little bit about BYU. BYU certainly always has a moderately good to moderately decent team, the Cougars, and as usual, they kind of have a mixed bag of tricks, if you will. They have a lot of winnable games, certainly Utah, Minnesota State, Hawaii, UMass, New Mexico State, but also you throw in some brutal matchups. They got Arizona, they got Wisconsin, they got Washington, and Boise State, and I thought they had somebody else there too. But nonetheless, BYU Cougars, good football team, but there again, because they have some very tough opponents mixed in their schedule, it makes it hard for them to do well when it comes to looking at them for the playoffs.
Well, there's 2 things working against BYU right now. There's one, Bronco Mendenhall left after 2 seasons ago for the University of Virginia. He's a really good coach at BYU. Probably going to make Virginia competitive in the ACC. But that's going against them, working in a new coach. And then number 2, also a few years ago, they dropped out of a conference and went independent, kind of like Navy, Navy's in a conference now, but kind of like Army and Notre Dame. They're at football independence. That works against BYU too, because now they don't have a conference opponents anymore. So now they have to schedule themselves a little tougher. So in the event they do have a good season and down the road, and when the playoff committee looks at teams and who's worthy of the strength of schedule, the whole thing we just talked about, who's worthy of playing in these upper echelon of bowl games and who isn't, BYU has to schedule themselves tough for not being in a conference. So working in a new coach and being a football independent, and adjusting to that lifestyle is that's 2 things working against BYU right now.
So, and Rick, I'll let you go ahead and chime in here in just a moment on anything that you might want to add to, but I also wanted to get to the 2019 thoughts as far as who we have the greatest chance of getting out of the 2019 playoffs, but some of the other strength of schedules just to look at when you get an opportunity, guys. We don't have time to break down all of these teams because we just got to move the show on along, but you got to look at Kansas, the Jayhawks as well. And you got
why don't we talk about elite teams, Tom? You keep bringing up these teams that ain't even going to win 2 games this year.
Well, what I did, and I was just going to go through the list, but I won't now because now you've made me feel bad about my list. No, I'm just kidding.
They just need to drop their football program, Kansas does, so they can figure out what they need to be doing.
I was actually getting ready to talk about Stanford, so you got to give me credit with Stanford, and I was going to talk about Ohio State, their strength of schedule. I was going to talk about who else? Where else did my list go? I was going to talk about Louisville. There you go. I was going to talk about UCLA. Obviously, they got a new coach everybody's looking at over there. But no, you wouldn't give your time. So Arizona State, we're going to talk about them. I was going to talk about the Longhorns. I was going to talk about the Wolfpack. I was going to talk about the Florida State Seminoles and their new coach. Oh, yeah, all of that I had on the agenda. The Tigers, the Auburn Tigers. But, no, I'm just kidding.
And not one elite team in there. Not one elite team in there yet.
Well, that's because
outside of maybe Stanford. Maybe Stanford.
That's because, Mr. Rick, the other topic that I was getting to, that I was teasing, that I was segmenting into, was teams that how did I title that segment? Teams that have a good odds of winning odds to win the 2019 college football playoff. Or something like that.
Well,
I can't remember
that's what this whole segment started out as you saying the team has the best chance to make the playoffs, and you brought up Missouri and Kansas.
Because what I started with saying was when we come to these conversations about the playoffs, one of the things that always comes into play is this team is not in the playoffs because of strength of schedule. So I wanted to talk a little bit about strength of schedule and some of these other teams that don't get into the playoffs because of strength of schedule. Okay, let's go into you want to talk about elite. Let's go with Alabama quarterback controversy, and it was created by the coach, and they have a quarterback controversy. Say what you want, but they have a quarterback controversy. But I don't think they have one because I think in the national championship last year they decided who their quarterback was going to be this year, no matter what is said by the leadership team, by the Alabama Crimson Tide. So you want go elite? We'll go elite. Alabama, go ahead, sir.
Well, they have enough talent to overcome a quarterback controversy, but you're right. It's exactly a controversy. And, Tom, we've said this on the show probably 100 times, and you know what I'm getting ready to say. If you have 2 quarterbacks, you really have how many? How many,
you have
Tom?
one quarterback.
If you have 2 quarterbacks.
You have one quarterback.
You have zero.
Well, they have 0 quarterbacks.
If you have 2 quarterbacks, you really have none, and that is going to actually hurt Alabama this year at the quarterback position because if they're sharing reps during practice, and Tua Tagovailoa is not getting the full share, because he probably should be the quarterback. If he's not getting the full share of the workload to run that offense, then they are going to struggle. Yeah, he can get out of the pocket. He's got a great cannon for an arm. But if he can't pick up the offense like he's supposed to be, because he's also coming back from an injury. I don't know if people knew that he was injured or not, but he had an elbow and shoulder injury. He didn't even play in their spring game because he's healing from an injury. So it's that on top of not getting the full workload for running the offense, that's going to hurt Alabama this year. I think Alabama might take a step back on offense because of the quarterback controversy.
And we'll see how that comes to play. That could actually come into the benefit of the Clemson Tigers. Obviously, they're in a mission to win another national title. And I know at the end of the year, we're always talking about Alabama and Clemson. But the Clemson Tigers, you want to keep talking about elite? You don't get any more elite than them.
Right, and the ACC is going to take a step back this year also, with the exception of Miami. How great Miami was last year. If Miami is actually a contender, they will be the biggest threat to Clemson this year in the ACC because Florida State's got a new coach. NC State's replacing a whole bunch of players, including Bradley Chubb, which we talked about in the NFL draft a lot in our draft shows. So the ACC's lost a lot of talent. They lost Lamar Jackson from Louisville, to the NFL. So Clemson's kind of a standalone team in the ACC. But Miami is their biggest competition. If Miami can play like it did last year, the whole turnover chain and everything that was great about Miami last year, they are the biggest threat to Clemson.
We can't continue our conversations about elite teams. How many times can I say elite teams before the end of the show, Rick? I don't know, but I'm going to make sure that I get it put in there. I'm going to make sure that we talked about elite teams. So we certainly have one right here in our backyard in the Big Ten, and that's Ohio State. Ohio State is not going to have their quarterback JT Burnell. We're going to have a new quarterback. They've got a somewhat of a quarterback controversy as well. Dwayne Haskins and Tate Merrill. Obviously, they've got Mike Weber that controls that running game over there, but Ohio State as well has a decision to make who's going to be under center this year.
Well, if it wasn't for Bryce Love at Stanford, the running back, he's probably going to be the Heisman favorite this year. He should be the Heisman favorite. Another name you're going to hear at the running back position is J.K. Dobbins at Ohio State. The kid's phenomenal runner, and that spread offense that Urban Meyer has. I do believe that the quarterback and running back combo, J.K. Dobbins and Tate, is going to be pretty well unstoppable. I think Ohio State is, depending on what Wisconsin does this year, because Michigan's not going to be a contender after they get beat by Notre Dame by 30 in the first game of the season. I think it's Ohio State's conference again. So, but watch out for J.K. Dobbins at running back.
Well, speaking of elite, we're going to continue using that word elite throughout the show, the rest of the show. Joins us now Mo from the BS Sports Show. We're continuing with elite. So the elite Mo from the BS Sports Show. How are you, sir?
Well, I know that you're a big liar now because I'm possibly...
Well, you missed the whole backstory there. We were doing our college football preview. Rick and I are in the conversation about that. And as I said, when we get into conversations about the 2019 playoffs, one of the things that we always talk about why this team is not in the playoffs, why is this team not in this bowl, is the word that we like to use all the time is strength of schedule. So I started going through a list of teams that probably won't be there. So I started talking about Missouri Tigers.
That is not how it played out, Tom. You go back to the show, you're going to see here's the list of teams that had the best chance at the 2019 playoff, and you brought up Kansas and Missouri. And then I got I got off on the
yeah. So he said I wasn't talking about any elite teams. So we moved on to more elite teams. It is what it is. But Mo, we're glad that you joined us. We do want to get your thoughts on a very important topic, and this is huge. It's huge news. Jimmy G goes out with a porn star in Beverly Hills, and then they end up with the Four Seasons. It's all over TMZ. This is big. We got to get your opinion on this, sir.
Well, first off, how do you know how big that Jimmy G is? I find that a little weird. But I think it's awesome. Who cares, man? He's out in California. Why not have some fun? I'm all about it. Having been with a adult film actress myself for a quick second, and I mean probably a quick couple seconds, it was quite an experience. So I'm all for Jimmy G doing that.
Well, I think more than anything, everybody says, the quarterback is the face of the franchise. And I know we could say, and we could break it down to the finite detail that he's not the face of the franchise because he's only played 6 games, as Rick pointed out. But whenever you pay someone $120 million, at that point you become the face of the franchise. And I think it's just a branding thing. And I think at the end of the day, it's just something for people to talk about. So,
would you rather talk about Jimmy G dating a porn star or guys kneeling during the anthem more? You know what I mean? So I'm all about it. I'm glad somebody talk for a little bit.
That's a good point.
That's on what I call the back page show notes. If we have to have filler, we could certainly do that. We could get into that conversation. But yeah, the NFL is screwing it up again and getting in their own way, and we'll get off in the weeds with that if we allowed ourselves to do that. But it's college preview. So we're just kind of breaking down. We moved into the more elite conversation now that you've joined us. So we're talking about power teams of teams that are most likely to win the 2019 college football playoffs. We've already talked about Alabama and Clemson, and we've talked about Ohio State. You could go ahead and throw in your thoughts on there, and we'll start with you, Mo. Georgia is our next team on the list here. The Bulldogs were oh so close last year. Thoughts on the Georgia Bulldogs? You can throw in thoughts on the so-called quarterback